before hike.
Yeah.
That's right.
I just gotta try to pull it up on here and figure out where
I did get down to the French Park for the first time in a while.
okay, can you speak?
It'll clean up.
You bet. Hi, Gina.
Okay, we're good.
All right.
We got sound. So
They've done a
yeah,
good job cleaning it up.
we're ready to start whenever you are. It is 3
Have a
o'clock.
quorum?
Do we have a quorum? We need 4 or 5.
We've got 8 now.
I have 8 now.
Pass.
Five.
There he is.
Save the day.
Hi, Dave.
I'm pretty sure Adam will be here too. I'm very different.
All right. We're ready to begin this meeting. Ready to call the meeting to order. This is the first meeting of the Parks and Community Enrichment Committee, July 9th. And the first order of business is a motion to approve today's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have all in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. The next piece of business here is the approval of minutes from May 14th, 2025. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion.
Dave? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. This is a public forum. Do we have anyone here who would like to comment from the general public?
No.
Okay. Ongoing business. Is there any ongoing business that, or we hold off until staff
No,
reports?
there's no ongoing business.
Okay. The next line item is new business. So the first piece is, I'll hand that over to you.
So as I mentioned at last month's meeting, Coral has been our chairperson and done a great job at that for a couple years now, longer than she is supposed to. So we need to appoint a new chair. So I was hoping that you could think about that over the last 2 months and come with some nominations as I recommended at the last meeting. So that person can become the new chair.
Yeah, I thought we did appoint Eric
Yeah.
and he graciously accepted.
He,
thought-
he was appointed as vice chair.
yeah,
Oh.
that's what it sounded like to me.
Okay, okay.
That's how I interpreted that conversation.
All right.
Yeah, I'm not in a position right now to nominate myself for that role.
All right. So we need to, I guess, before the next meeting, right? Or
Ideally at this
preferably
meeting,
right
because
now,
that's why I
yes.
mentioned it at the last meeting.
I don't know if it is in the cards for me to be chair right now.
Let's,
That is-
let's talk for just a second about what it means to be chair.
Yes, I was.
That was just my question.
So maybe that will be helpful. So it's not a time, and as Carl can attest, it's not a time-consuming responsibility. Your primary responsibility as chair is to run the meeting.
Mhm.
Staff will occasionally consult with the chair on agenda items, but
I generally would reach out to the chair once a month to go over what I recommend be on the agenda. They could put it together, or if they don't want to, I can. But that's about as the extent of outside of the meeting goes.
I concur. It's maybe an extra 30, 45 minutes.
Is
That-
it possible for us at the end of this meeting to take 5 minutes offline to talk about this as a group?
Coral can stay chair. She'll just continue in that role until you all are ready to nominate somebody. So you can even talk about it offline and then come back next month with a recommendation.
I'm willing to go another meeting, but I am ready to,
And that's why I had presented it 2 months ago.
Okay.
Because I think we should go ahead and do it if we can. But if we need to think about it while this meeting goes along, we can do that.
Yes.
I'd be happy to do it. I'm just throwing my name out there. I think it'd be a very educational, informative experience, and I have the time right now to do it. So just saying, if no one else wants to, I'm happy to.
I'll make a motion. All in favor of Adam moving into the new chair position?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. That was the easiest selection ever.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Eric, your role would just be to fill in for Adam if he's unavailable.
Absolutely.
To run the meetings.
So maybe
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Do I have to make a speech now?
if you want to. If you want to help him kind of learn the process and how to run the meeting, maybe he can watch you the rest of this meeting, and then he can take over at the next meeting.
Yes,
Great.
The verbiage and the steps. And
Yes, great.
excellent.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Sure.
All right, next order, Buncombe County. Helene Recovery Plan overview.
Yeah, Adrian's gonna pull up. So this is the beginning draft of the town of Woodfin's projects, what we call recovery projects. So a while back, Buncombe County reached out to all the municipalities and asked if we would be interested in participating in they initially called it a long-term recovery plan. They've now kind of stepped away from that and call it just a clean recovery plan. And the purpose of this plan is to identify if we have fully recovered from this event in the next 10 years, 20 years, what does that look like? So what kinds of things would we expect to see in our community? And Buncombe County is looking at the recovery from, a larger perspective countywide. And so they've invited all the municipalities to submit their own list of recovery projects that would be included just in individual sections within the larger plan. So we were given some basic instructions. Our staff have met with the assigned FEMA planner. So Buncombe County was able to get FEMA support for this initiative. So we have a couple planners who've been assigned by FEMA to help us kind of walk us through this process. And so the town of Woodfin has created our initial draft, and it includes identifying, of course, what the project is, the purpose and need. Let's see, I'll just scroll through here. The benefits, intended outcomes, key activities, deliverables, interdependencies, timing, complexity, cost, project lead, anticipated project partners, and implementation considerations. So we have, I think, 16 or 17 projects. We are working on populating or filling all of these different cells for each project. And what gets shared with Buncombe County for the plan is going to look something like this. It's going to be narrative sentences, a few sentences for one section, might be a bulleted list for other sections, but it's going to be fairly streamlined. It's going to be sort of the big picture. We're going to maintain a more detailed version of that same project list so that as we try to implement these, we can remind ourselves of what all of the different kinds of detailed considerations that we were imagining when we first thought up this idea. And then as it evolves, I'm sure some of these things will change. This is not the format that's going to appear in the plan. This is just what Buncombe County has given us to kind of start to get our drafts ready. It'll be a little bit more graphically laid out when the plan is put together. Buncombe County's goal is to have the entire draft plan ready by the first year anniversary, so end of September. And then with adoption, probably shortly after that. And Buncombe County commissioners will adopt it, as will all the other participating municipalities. I'm happy to say that all the municipalities in Buncombe County are participating. So this will be a plan that will have everybody's input and participation in. So we are already looking at implementing some of these ideas. You may have heard about CDBG-DR funds being allocated for this particular storm event. And if you're not familiar with CDBG, that's Community Development Block Grant. That's a federal funds that get administered down through the state, and then the state kind of dispenses the funds. CDBG primarily focuses on assisting or projects that assist or support low to moderate income households. This additional funding, so CDBG is an annual bucket of funds that get dispersed. There's an annual application process. It's very competitive. It's some of the only money that's available for certain kinds of projects. CDBG-DR is disaster relief. It's the same Community Development Block Grant, disaster relief, and it is allocated specifically for those who are impacted, those counties that were impacted by the storm. So that's an additional, I think it's over $1 billion. the lion's share of that is set aside for individual homeowner repair and rehabilitation. So, and that's the cornerstone of the DR funding projects. That is funding that the municipalities do not have access to. But there are other buckets that we potentially have access to. So as we contemplate these projects, we're also already starting to think about funding sources. So CDBG DR is one. We've met recently with the EPA to talk about community, community, sorry, I'm blanking on it. I want to say community revitalization. And they do, it's sort of a technical assistance grant where they come in with a team and then you build your local team and they look at a particular project. So just as an example, one of our project ideas is developing resiliency hubs. In the event that we had another emergency, we would have these centers established where people would know they could go to for water, shelter, other information. And the EPA, like this is a grant, technical assistant grant that might help us move the needle on establishing resiliency hubs. So those are just a couple examples of some of what we're looking at. We did also receive a Climate Smart Community Initiative grant. We partnered with Swananoa and working with some of our nonprofits in the community to apply for that funding. We were one of the few that were awarded, so we felt pretty good about that. Swananoa actually is more front and center in that grant than we are, understandably, but where our needs overlap, we will get a little bit of planning assistance there as well. So we're trying to look at all of the opportunities to kind of help us advance our resiliency moving forward. So I just wanted to kind of share that with you all. Be happy to share this draft with you. We were trying to get it in a more shareable state. It's almost there. I think another week or so we'll have it so where we can share it more broadly, and we'd be happy to share a copy with you all so you can kind of see what we're looking at. So,
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
What, the funds that Governor Stein just approved a week or two ago,
Yep.
do any of these grant funds come from that package?
Not that package. That package, trying to remember all of what that goes to. If you can, I think, go on like the governor's website and kind of see like this much of that package goes to this much of that package goes to that. Most of what we were looking at with that package is what we call hazard mitigation funding.
Mm-hmm.
And hazard mitigation, when you work with a disaster like this, you realize when you hear the word mitigation, it can mean a lot of different things depending on who you're talking to. And hazard mitigation, when it comes from the state in this context, is really looking at, they are resiliency projects, but they're resiliency projects that have to be able to be shovel ready by, I think it was the end of October or mid-October.
Uh-huh.
And we didn't have any projects like that.
Okay, so that's where like Mountain True would come in with like the debris removal. I think like they're maybe one of the organizations that's trying to, they might put boots along the river cleaning up.
Yeah. They're very possibly. I'm not sure. Like there's a lot of like kind of nuanced applications of this funding. And I'm not familiar with all of them. I've mostly focused on where I thought we could take advantage, potentially take advantage. And I know, we didn't have anything shovel ready. Unlike, just to use as an example, in trying to understand how this funding could be applied, I spoke to some colleagues at City of Asheville. And because they're much bigger and they have more resources, they had projects that they had already been planning before the hurricane hit. So they had already had engineered projects. They just didn't have the funding for construction.
Oh.
So the hurricane comes along, it causes additional damage, but they have these shovel-ready projects, engineered plans all ready to go. All they had to do was submit it. So we just didn't have anything quite like that. Or the things that we had were already funded.
Mm.
And if they're already funded, you can't take advantage of this. One example is like updating codes. Well, we had already funded our code update. So we can't now go back and try to unfund it and get this money.
Right.
There were some other, I think that funding also set aside money for individual home rehabilitation. Affordable housing is another one that we've been really interested in, and I haven't given up on that potential yet. The challenge there is you have to have a site, or you have to have a site that you've identified to acquire, and we just don't have that yet. Or we don't have it, and possibly just not yet. So these are the things we're looking at. So yeah, I'm trying very hard not to leave a funding opportunity out if it's something we could potentially take advantage of. If we pursued something like CDBGR, depending on how it gets packaged, we don't have the capacity to actually manage that. And that's the other challenge to some of this funding, is we would actually have to hire somebody or have a partner who had the capacity to do that. So if it's an affordable housing project, somebody like a Mountain Housing Opportunities could potentially be a partner who could manage the grant side. But something like an infrastructure repair, we would probably have to hire an engineering firm to help us with that. So
It's helpful. Thank you.
Are any of these in for like cleaning up any of the river below the dam there?
below the dam,
Like when does Woodfin cut off? I guess where the river is? How far down does it go?
it goes past the dam. It goes to, shoot, we don't have a map in here. It goes to sort of like the Craggy Correctional Facility.
Yeah.
Yep, if you kind of know where that is. And then the Buncombe County Solar Field on the opposite side of the river. So that's about where our jurisdiction ends.
Okay.
So FEMA should be in the river soon to restart waterway cleanup. They have completed in Woodfin, they've done all of the waterways, the smaller waterways, and they left the French Broad for last. We have now transitioned with the state. So all of our debris removal operations have now moved over to the state. They're going to administer that program now instead of us, which is great. That's a huge help for us. So we're really excited about that. They're going to handle the French Broad River.
That should be funded, not out of this money.
Well,
theoretically.
I think we're going to see both. I think we're going to see FEMA do, and what they will address is very specific. It has to be debris that is threatening public infrastructure that is within 1,000 feet of that infrastructure. So if you had a tractor trailer that is upstream of a bridge, they will remove that. If you have a bunch of silver line pipe that is not going to impact infrastructure, it's not going to knock a bridge down, they may or may not. It just depends. If that pipe might clog or create a problem with the dam or a culvert or something like that, they might remove it. So they're kind of the first sweep, right? We want to get them in and get them to clean up the river first, get all the big stuff out, all of the most threatening stuff out. And our other contractors can't perform work while they're in the river. So we need to get them in and get them out. So I'm hoping that will happen soon. After that, I think we're going to see a small army of Mountain True, Asheville Greenworks, other volunteers getting in there, French Broad River Academy, you all do cleanups too, getting in there and doing these other smaller projects. We, as part of our community grant program, we set aside funds for Asheville Greenworks this year to do some additional cleanups in the town of Woodfin. So they're going to help us with some of that. And then beyond that, I think some of this hazard mitigation funding is supposed to be available for, I think the focus there is more on stream bank repair and revegetation. And so that's another potential source of funding. So I don't quite know, it's hard to know how all of this is going to come together and how satisfying it's going to be, but it's something.
We gotta do step one first.
We gotta-
FEMA, and
we-
then see what it is.
Got to start somewhere. So
So much to navigate.
it is.
You're doing such a great
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
So much. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Welcome.
So moving on to the Walk Bike Woodfin draft comprehensive bike ped plan I sent out to you guys. I'm sure you spent the rest of the time reviewing that over the last 2 weeks, and know it in and out, but just in case you don't, I'll go over it for you.
It's impressive. That's impressive.
Adrian, did you make that?
No, I cannot take credit for that. That was a consultant firm that made that. So
It is very impressive.
it is. I agree. So just a little bit of background about the plan and how we got here. So it's funded through the NCDOT Integrated Mobility Program that funds comprehensive bike ped plans. And like I just said, it was prepared by McAdams, which is a consultant we were working with, formerly TPD. I don't know if you're familiar with that firm, but they're now McAdams. With assistance from town staff and then a volunteer steering committee that met a couple times through the process. The plan and the recommendations of the plan take into account several different things: current conditions of bike ped facilities, plans for future bike ped facilities, community feedback, and then the existing demographics and what the town's made, what's in the town now. And then it just identifies recommended bike ped facilities independently, but also as a network. So that's kind of what we got in the plan. A little bit about the timeline. So we started this plan creation in March of 24. Over March and April, we had our kickoff meeting. We developed it. Well, the consultant developed the community engagement plan and gathered some data about the town. And then for the next few months after that, until about August of 24, they did some site visits. We had our first steering committee meeting. They issued the community survey that they used to put some of this plan together. And they did a pop-up event at the Woodfin 5K. Then Helene hit, so it was on hold for a few months. So we got started again in January. We had our second steering committee meeting. They had a public meeting at Newbridge Baptist Church. I think some of you came to that. And they started prioritizing the projects of all the research they'd done to that point. And then most recently, they had their last steering committee meeting and have been developing the plan. So this is the draft plan I'm going over with you today to get your feedback, and it'll go to council next week for review and possibly approval. I did want to point out there's several different types of pedestrian bicycle facilities listed in the plan. I didn't know if you noticed that or not, but in addition to, sidewalks and things, greenways, there's also bike lanes. There's shared streets, which is like adding signage or traffic calming devices to streets so it can be friendly for pedestrians and vehicles alike. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. There's several different options listed in the plan. So they took all that information and they use a prioritization scoring system to make the recommendations that you see. And it was up to 17 points based on 4 different categories. The highest category being safety. So the project could get up to 8 points for safety, up to 3 points for connectivity, up to 3 points for equity and serving underserved or disadvantaged populations in our jurisdiction, and then up to 3 points for public support. So they've listed several recommendations throughout the plan, and at the end, there's 7 priorities that could be something we could focus on now. So I'll kind of go through all the recommendations in a nutshell, and then kind of focus more on the priority options. Something to also note is they broke out the prioritization of roads from state roads and local roads. So they're 2 separate prioritizations because they're 2 kind of different animals. So in looking at the NCDOT roads, they have about 15 different recommendations. And I won't go through all of them, but the top recommendation is Merriman Avenue and Weaverville Road, a sidewalk along that corridor from Elkwood Avenue to Greenbush Creek. The second recommendations, or the next 4 recommendations are Elk Mountain Road, sidewalks connecting the existing neighborhoods to that road, to the school, 4 different projects in that realm. And then it goes on to less scoring projects, but still some recommendations of what it would be like in a perfect world with bike and bike and ped facilities within the town of Woodfin. And looking at local roads, also a handful, about 10 different recommendations came out of their work. The top two were along Jonestown Road, a sidewalk. The first project would be from Reese Street to Elk Mountain Road along Jonestown. The second would be from Reese Street to Riverside, so one direction and the other. The number 3 spot for local roads was City View Drive to connect to Rugby Way, so you could get access to Riverside Drive and across the road.
What does all projects mean in this? When I was looking at it, I was like, okay.
In what
It's
context?
like
In the legend.
the legend, it just says all projects is gray. I guess for the first one, it was like Brookdale Avenue, North Woodfin had the purple.
I think it means all projects in all the different categories, like state roads, local connector greenways, shared space. There's also a category for local connector greenways. We are already aware of what those are. As you can see, the top two there are, well, I don't have the legend, but is Beaver Dam Creek Greenway and 251 that's already in progress. The third one is a local connector greenway along 6th Street to the community center. But that's not something that's in the works right now. In addition to the local connector greenways, they have some recommendations or some references to regional greenway recommendations, but those are part of much bigger plans, different agencies involved. So I won't go over that, but it is in the plan if you want to look at it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, they have some neighborhood shared street recommendations, and these are where we would have traffic calming devices or signage or things to make people slow down. And they've identified a couple different areas. The top one being Green Oak Road, next being Short Vine Street. So those are some things we can probably think about pretty quickly. And then they also have a section in here on Rural Road, shared space, like along Old Lesser Highway, and maybe like rumble strips or signage or things like that along those longer, more busy roads. So that all led to the top 7 priority projects, and they are listed here. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, being the sidewalks along Merriman and Weaverville Avenue. Project priority number 2 is Elk Mountain Road. They've listed some long-term recommendations and some short-term recommendations, and they've also listed the cost estimates in for all these projects. So that was interesting to me. The long-term recommendation is a sidewalk and bike lanes on both sides from Riverside to Jonestown, and a multi-use side path from Jonestown to Elkwood. But in the shorter term, they are recommending a bike lane uphill from Riverside to Jonestown, and a Sharrows downhill on the westbound lane, which was a new term to me. Shannon had to explain to me what a Sharrows was.
Could you explain to us?
It's a bike. It's like a what?
It's a share the street pavement marking that usually you see it. It's a bicycle with the little chevrons, so like little arrows pointing in the direction of traffic. So share the road, arrows.
Sharrow.
It's usually where you don't have enough room for a bike lane. So you just do these markings, which just alerts mostly I think the motorists that you may see bicycles, so be prepared to share.
In that near-term recommendation, they're also recommending a short sidewalk section in the gaps from Cottage Street to West Island Circle and from Elk Park Drive to Penley Avenue along Elk Mountain Road. And then some crossing upgrades. So that's priority number 2. Number 3 is Jonestown Road. And again, we have some long-term and some near-term recommendations. The long-term is sidewalk on one side from Riverside to Elk Mountain. I guess so along the entire Jonestown Road. The near term would be upgraded the existing sidewalk and crossings along that road, and add a new section of sidewalk connecting Town Hall to the park. And then priority project number 4 has 3 different sections. It's the Riverside Connectivity Plan, kind of focused around access to the parks and the wave and everything when it comes online. So the 4A is what they refer to it as, is crossing at Riverside Drive and Elk Mountain Road down at MSD. So upgrading that. The 4B is the City View Drive to Craggy Bridge project. And 4C is connecting Woodfin Avenue to Riverside Drive and a crossing there. So that's one big project with along that corridor. The 5th recommendation is sidewalk on the north side connecting Riverside Drive to North Bend Drive along City View Drive. So it's connecting back further from City View to Riverside Drive. And then there's a second project recommendation connecting the intersection of City View to Old Wester Highway. The 6th recommendation is, if I can find it. Well, maybe that's why, because that Riverside connector had 3 projects in it. So that's all the priority recommendations for the plan. So that's the plan in a nutshell. I'll open it up to you if you want to have any questions or comments.
I think it's well done. Glad to see Elk Mountain Road and Jonestown Road as priorities. The phrase in there for the connection over I-26 is advance something. It's not a strong recommendation. I'd like to see a stronger recommendation for connecting that side of the town, the east side of I-26 to west side. Also, Pelzer, I think, should be on the list of shared streets. I know Dave uses it a lot. 3 of us own property or
Okay.
live on that street, so it may be our.
Yeah.
And this is just a comment. At times, with all the boilerplate and information, and maybe it's because of my background, I thought I was reading a transportation planning manual instead of a plan, and others may have a different perspective just because I have a stronger background in that.
So what would you like to see differently?
That's just a comment. I'd like to hear from others.
Okay.
All the background information.
So I will say this plan's a little bit different because they had just finished up the comprehensive plan right when we got this funding. So they wanted to come up with some of the top projects that we could get started on sooner than just having the plan and the recommendations of the plan. So I think that's why they highlighted those 7, because they did do it a little bit differently than they usually would have, because the comp plan had just been completed.
Definitions of all the terms.
Okay.
And again, it may be because of my background, but I look at that as not as important as the recommendations and the.
Okay. I got you.
And I will say, as someone who does not have that background, you're right, it was a large body of the report, but having that foundation was.
Well, that's good. I appreciate
I enjoyed reading through the report. I might be biased because I live on the other side of the highway, but one thing that I saw in the report was there was a cluster of like 2 pedestrian crashes and a bike crash all on this Brookdale Road, North Woodfin Avenue. And maybe because of the highway project, getting across Elk Mountain is gonna add connectivity. But to me, what would add connectivity would be if it could be a priority to get a sidewalk from there up to where then it would hit the greenway coming down the creek. And just because the main clusters of wrecks there were 3 there and then the others were up on the Marion.
You're talking about
Highway
here?
Zone. Yep. And so,
Yeah.
and the other reason I would say that, not just because it's me, but there's multiple mobile home parks there and people that walk. There's that like convenience store there. And so to me, that makes sense to put a sidewalk through there to connect that whole block of people to the greenway there that comes up Beaver Dam Creek.
Yeah, I like that.
Or Elk Mountain Road, but
I like that.
It is a treacherous stretch of road.
Yeah.
it's a treacherous stretch of road, and I've thought about it
because.
because because Elkwood, that's like city of Asheville.
Oh, so right here and go.
So
across.
I would push more for Brookdale Road, North Woodfin to have a sidewalk or a bike lane or something to be able to connect all those people that might not have a car to the greenway, then to be able to walk up to Merriman Avenue, connect to all that stuff.
It might not accomplish exactly what you're saying, but another option that I've been talking with City of Asheville staff about is looking at a connection along the road. That's a little more doable, like from a terrain standpoint.
It's like this.
Yeah.
Elwood?
Elkwood is like super tight, and then Brookdale has all this space, and then it goes in front of the recycling center.
Until you get to the recycling.
Yeah.
center.
Yeah.
Until you get to the
It's really
recycling
tight.
center,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where it would get tight.
So, interestingly, Elkwood isn't, I know what you're talking, so this side of Elkwood is City of Asheville, the west side is Town of Woodland.
Right.
So the more developable part of Elkwood is the City of Asheville.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had been speaking with them about the
Yeah.
possibility of maybe doing something along Elkwood.
Right.
And there's also transportation stops along.
Yeah, there's bus
That's
stops,
the other
yeah.
reason That we liked it on
And
Elkwood.
s- And that would work for me personally, but it wouldn't work for all the people in the
Yeah.
mobile home
Mhm.
parks
Wherever
and all the
we-
people that are over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Is
aren't there
Is
shortcuts?
there a connection from Brookdale to Elkwood? Is that?
Yeah, through Pellsbury Street.
Yeah, that's Pellsbury.
Valley Park.
Valley Park.
Oh, so yeah, any route that we do, right, it's gonna help some, but not
Yeah,
everybody.
Right.
So it's-
100%.
Yeah, there's pros and cons, whichever one you look at. But we may have a willing partner there. It's not to say that that wouldn't become a priority as well, but we may have a willing partner there, so.
Sweet. So either one of those is, I would say that would connect that
And-
neighborhood.
Anything's progress.
Yeah.
When you look at some of these ideas, and in particular Jonestown Road, because it's right here, how are the neighborhoods feeling about this? Because, they're losing, potentially fencing on their yard or space, tree lines. What do those conversations look like?
I mean, we did some community input and they did a survey, so we tried to get as much feedback as we could, but we haven't had those conversations specifically with neighborhoods because we're not sure. Jonestown,
Is that the one that ends in the coffee shop?
It's Jonestown right here, correct?
there's going to be some,
And Woodfin Avenue, both in that penny cup.
there's going to be some feasibility issues with Jonestown, I would imagine. So, we'll just have to see what that looks like when we would
Not
have
too
to
much
do
side
some
on
more
Jonestown.
research.
Okay.
Yeah, I can promise you there will be some unhappy people. I mean, anytime you put, and the displeasure is usually a few different things. Like some people don't like having people walking by the front of their house, they're going to cause noise, it's going to be disruptive, you're inviting people to my property and I don't want that. Others are not going to like it because it takes up some of the space that they had been using. Most of the time we try to put those sidewalks or multi-use paths in a right-of-way. But people don't always recognize where the right-of-way is. The right-of-way almost always comes onto like what they think of as their property. It goes past the edge of pavement. So it's town land to make use of for transportation infrastructure, but it may end up taking a little piece of grass or some shrubs or some trees or something that they had enjoyed as part of their front yard. So it's always, progress is always going to come with some growing pains. And so that we would expect that some people, we would do a communication, we would outreach to them, invite them to a public meeting to kind of understand what the impacts were, when we get to that point where we would actually be planning an alignment and construction.
One more question. Projects of this sort, in particular, sidewalks, are they predominantly on one side versus the other? Is there any sort of like uniformity to that, or it's just really whatever works on that particular street?
I think which side of the street you go with is going to largely be dictated. They probably will focus on one side of the street. If you had unlimited funds and you were starting fresh, brand new with a big old subdivision, you might look at sidewalk on both sides of the street. But in most cases, they're probably going to look at one side or the other. And that is largely going to be driven by feasibility, which is the flatter side, which is the more developable side, which is going to have fewer having to relocate stormwater infrastructure, less, that sort of thing. But they also will look at connectivity. So how does that sidewalk connect to another sidewalk? How does it connect to a transportation stop? Are we connecting a neighborhood, a mobile home park to goods and services? Are we connecting a neighborhood to a school? So they're going to try to look at, what is the greatest public benefit while also looking at feasibility. If that makes sense.
And without question, I'm sure the powers that be are thinking, when you're looking at Elk Mountain Road and looking at connectivity to the future of Woodfin and the wave and things of that nature, which I think would, for me personally, would lean to the top of the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, those safe connectors that they have.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised some of those weren't number one.
Yeah.
The second those things are open, folks are. gonna be
I
already getting to, just kind of like Silver Line Park.
Yeah, the Elkwood Avenue conversation, I recently elevated, like the plan, when I had seen an earlier draft of the plan, I noticed that there wasn't anything on Elkwood or Brookdale. And it was particularly, for me, it was a higher priority because if you can get down here and we can, you get really close to connecting people to the Beaver Dam Creek Greenway.
Right.
Mhm.
More of a parking
Up,
issue.
up, along the Riverside Park Greenway.
Mhm.
So
And closer to things like grocery stores, because it's a little bit of a
and
food desert over here
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I did raise that question, and having your input also is helpful. So the more input like that we get, we can maybe add to the plan. So.
The
So,
longer the purple line is 1 mile.
yeah, exactly. An idea, instead of looking at putting a sidewalk on Merriman Weaverville Highway, has it been considered to put in a multi-use path instead? Because we're looking at the Woodfin to Weaverville feasibility of a bike path. So what if we just went ahead and built a multi-use path instead of just a sidewalk? So that could already be in the works. Just curious if that is.
I would say a lot of our DOT projects recently, because stormwater has been so expensive with sidewalks, they've been leaning more towards like multi-use paths. And I wouldn't be surprised if like a really long sidewalk like that stormwater is just like astronomical with it, and they might lean more towards that too.
I mean, it seems like the idea is that we need pedestrian facilities along that corridor. What that pedestrian facility is not cut in stone.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a possibility that it could be a multi-use path.
Yeah, I think we are seeing more multi-use paths being considered. They're
Yeah,
less expensive to
Right.
build. They're a little bit more flexible.
right.
But they don't last as long. So concrete lasts much longer than asphalt.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons you look at it. And I think the more heavily commercialized a corridor is, sidewalk gives you just a little more separation.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit more visible.
Yeah.
And, but it is, there's pros and cons. So.
But it's for walking. You can't ride a bike on the sidewalks, right?
You're not
Which-
supposed to.
Right. So,
People will do that.
yeah, of course. And rightfully so. If
Yeah,
it's safer
right, you
for
don't
them
have
to
a
do
safe
that.
alternative, yeah.
But I'm just thinking, if we are thinking in a long-term vision of connecting Woodfin and Weaverville, if we just go ahead and start with a path that's bikeable
Yeah.
Maybe that gets the ball rolling in the right direction as opposed to having to redo something later on.
These are also DOT facilities. And so I think they have their criteria for when they look at multi-use paths versus sidewalks as well. So I think that would also be a consideration. So.
I like that idea a lot because I mean, I drive Merriman a zillion times a day and I never see anyone biking on Merriman Ave in those bike lanes.
Scary.
Super scary.
Yeah, I do. I see them. I mean, not a lot,
Yeah.
but I've seen them. And I think we will see more and more. The other difficulty with multi-use paths is you want them to be at least 10 feet wide. And sidewalks are 4 to 5 feet wide. And you want them wider because you're accommodating more than, like, you want to be able to have a bicycle go around pedestrians and not create conflict. So you want them to be wider. And if you ended up with a 5-foot multi-use lane, you may have some trouble. But in low volume areas, maybe it makes sense. It's a first step. So we'll see.
Cool.
What's the rationale for sidewalk on the other side of Elk Mountain? Like, why do we need it on both sides? To me, I feel like why not use those resources for some of the other priorities?
I think because there's no connection between one side to the other. Like, there's no crosswalks. There's no. We talked about that. Maybe there needs to be some more crosswalks. Where the neighborhoods are and where you enter, but there's no way to cross now. So people are going both directions. They need somewhere to walk.
That's a good question.
I agree with Carl on that, it's about using those resources, revenue elsewhere.
And that was the long-term recommendation. The short-term was just one side. Or the short-term was bike lanes.
I love the idea of the bike lanes
Yeah.
because you have the width on Elk Mountain. It's such a well done, like, kudos to your team and the firm that put it together. It's really, really well done. Sharos, Riverside Drive, just thinking about like the recent bike accidents, which are horrific. I know that's not a town road. Can there be any kind of indicators put? I mean, I know everything. I love this.
Yeah, we've asked.
DOT.
And we actually, this is, well, I shouldn't say it's funny, but it's a little bit funny. Shortly after I started work with the town, this was 3 years ago, I got contacted by the DOT to see if we were responsible for these sharrows that got installed on Riverside Drive. I had no idea what they were talking about, so I went out to look at it. And it was clearly like homemade sharrows. Like somebody had a stencil and they did it, and they just like spray painted these. So it was total guerrilla, activity. But I thought it was really telling, that people want these things, somebody went out in the dead of night and
And you think about the context of this study, right? It's like that is the most heavily used bike road in our town.
I can tell you that the DOT's response, I mean, we have tried to ask for sidewalk crossings is a big, we've tried to ask them about crossings. And I will say that the newer staff at the DOT are a lot more open and receptive to these conversations than the former DOT staff. So that's very welcoming. And so we don't want to discourage that openness and conversation. But I mean, they're very much looking to the Greenway as being a bike facility for people to use. And, maybe there's an opportunity for some crossings, but you have to have a crossing that can, like, you have to connect a sidewalk. You have to have, for that crossing to be justified, you have to have sidewalk or some sort of multi-use path on both sides. So we have to kind of figure out, and that's, I think, at least one of these recommendations.
It's
we'll have to accomplish.
Woodfin Avenue and Silverland Park.
So we want to try to.
But they have pretty strict protocols they have to follow, which is why it's so hard to get them to do things.
I think if we're just about to go on the Greenway, I would be like, okay, I can live with that. But I just still feel like that's so far off, and there's just today, there's just so many people using Riverside Drive.
Yeah, we're a lot farther along with the Greenway than we are with any other, like a sidewalk on Riverside Drive. So even if we were to start a Riverside Drive sidewalk conversation today, the greenway will get done before that will happen.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and I think that's part of why.
Great.
One of the questions I had, if I remember correctly, part of what needed to happen with the DOT on the Greenway was answering some final questions on access. If I'm remembering that correctly, which I may not be. Does any of this play into getting that plan finalized with the DOT?
Are you talking about at MSD?
Yes.
Yeah, that was part of it, but then the storm happened. So there's some realignment that has to happen now because of changes from the storm. So,
But it doesn't
It's-
solve that piece.
No, no. If anything, the storm's complicated that piece.
And I think we had said that was a project maybe for like 2027.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What is the timeline on the Greenway now? Just curious.
Construction to start in 2027 tentatively.
Yeah. So the park will be done before the greenway. I mean, I think the park will be done and open, and then we'll start to have greenway construction. So, yeah.
And then I had a question specifically on the Table 11 action plan recommendation. The recommendation that I have a question on is to form a bike ped advisory committee or task the existing group. And so is that one of the decisions we're making today?
No.
No, it's something for us to consider.
That's just things we can do to get closer to implementing these recommendations. And we can talk about that once the plan's adopted and what our priorities are going to be for implementing some of that stuff.
I do think it would make sense to fold it into the existing group because so much of this overlaps with the initiatives that we're already involved with.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Going back to my comment on the Elk Mountain Road recommendation, do you know what that phrase, and I can't remember the rest of it, advance something for the connection, what they mean by that? Yeah. Seemed like a pretty wimpy
It was for Elk Mountain.
Elk Mountain Road.
Elk Mountain over 26.
26.
I don't know. I'll have to look back at the plan. I can get back to you on that.
We connect the east side to the
Yeah.
west side.
Right.
I mean, I second that. I think that needs to be a high priority.
My fear is they want to wait until all of I-26 is done, and we're in the same place we were 20 years ago. I'd like to see it in my lifetime.
Yeah, we could all walk here, Dave and I think we could walk here if we had
A sidewalk.
a
Yeah.
sidewalk, but like you're taking your life in your own hands trying to cross just this little bridge right here.
Right.
It's bisecting our town. You can't even walk across, the highway.
Right.
That has to get done in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I get on my bike and I have to go that way, that's the most dangerous part of my entire ride.
Yeah.
Is crossing
So-
26.
Mhm.
Yeah.
As someone who lives on this side, that's the reason I can't use public transit. Because even though the bus stop really is that far.
Yep.
To have to make that walk
To get
the
over
bus
there,
stop
yeah.
is taking your life in your hands.
It shouldn't be that hard.
I do
I don't think-
sketchy median stuff where you get on the median.
I do that.
So I like ride on the median half the time.
What, over the bridge?
So, well, once you
'Cause if you do
cross the
that,
bridge,
you're in-
then you
Once
get up
cross
on the
bridge, you can
median.
hit
'Cause
the
if you-
median.
Yes, and then I'm riding
Gotcha.
up the median.
It's the shoulders like
If
this.
you do it on the
There is no
bridge,
shoulder, so I hop on the
Right.
median, go up, then like look, and then get back in the lane.
See that?
Yeah,
That
Yeah.
shouldn't be.
yeah.
It should not be.
I use that technique.
Just one last thing, regarding the cyclists who were lost. I actually knew one of them
Oh,
fairly
no.
well.
So sorry.
Yeah, he, worked at Liberty Bikes, and just a really great guy. So I'm just curious, people speed down that road like crazy. Is there any other thing we can do to
Which
On
Riverside
Riverside.
Drive.
drive?
Yeah.
And especially the dump trucks, and they are just a absolute danger to anyone on the road.
Yeah. So I promise you, we have looked at speed enforcement on Riverside Drive at length. It is very challenging. And I'm not trying to say that as an excuse, but I want you and anybody else who's interested and concerned about this to kind of maybe help communicate with others what's going on. So one of the big challenges is, yes, we have a lot of this big truck traffic, and they're almost all going to the landfill. So I don't know what the life of the landfill is, but at some point that landfill will be capped and it'll go away, and hopefully that truck traffic kind of goes away. I'm not saying that isn't why we shouldn't still do speed enforcement. We do speed enforcement. We have a new traffic sign that we have positioned on Riverside Drive. We use that to collect data. It's a reminder to people, it's a visual reminder to slow down, but we also use it to collect data. And so we know what the peak hours of speeding are, the peak days, and so we can concentrate our enforcement based on that. One of the biggest challenges to speed control, speed enforcement on that road is there's very few places where you can pull somebody over. There are very few places where a patrol officer can sit in a vehicle and then pull somebody over based on that. And you think about those big trucks, you're going to be gumming up traffic. You're going to try to get them off the road, and you're going to be following them a great distance, a lot of times outside of our jurisdiction, in order to, have that conversation with those folks. So they do it a lot. They concentrate a lot. People don't realize probably how much our officers are down on Riverside Drive. But it is difficult. It's not like they can kind of sit on the interstate and just sort of pop on, or in some of our other roads where it's a little bit easier for them to kind of lay in wait.
Is there any mechanism to get it designated as like a bicycle safety corridor or something where the fines increase for speeding along that section of road? Is that even in North Carolina?
I've never heard of that, but that's a really interesting concept. We can ask the DOT about that, and others, and see if we can.
Yeah, I don't even know if it exists. It's just an idea.
We have been, especially with all of the extra truck traffic with debris activities, there has been a lot of stopping those contractors, getting them to slow down, because for them, time's money. They're speeding more than they should.
They have the double trucks, they're pulling a trailer filled with trees too.
Not to get too far in the weeds about that accident, but was that a speeding issue?
No, they don't know what happened. He crossed the yellow line going the opposite direction and ran into a group of cyclists. And it may be malicious. They don't know.
Just so horrible.
Or it was either malicious or that he had a mechanical or medical issue.
Yeah.
But it should never have happened, of course.
Is this a truck?
Yeah.
It was a dump truck.
Dump truck.
Yeah, it's horrific.
I think three cyclists, right?
He hit 3 cyclists and killed 2 instantly.
And I think the third was an intensive.
He was
not
he was
intensive
actually
care.
okay.
He was
He actually
released
spoke at the memorial. He was not injured that badly. But
What time of day was it?
I was in the evening, I think around 7:30. But yeah, it's just horrific.
It is. All of these accidents are, there's not a single one that isn't, unfortunate and could have been avoided if, we had better infrastructure. So, Riverside Drive is a DOT road. So, one of the upsetting things about when you start to look at these plans and these studies is when you realize that from a DOT perspective, a lot of what gets prioritized is based on crash data. And I'm hoping that, as tragic as these situations are, that it will hopefully make addressing these situations a higher priority, and, they'll pay more attention to them in the future. So.
Well, I know the Asheville cycling community and Buncombe County cycling community is going to be pressing this hard with everybody.
We've been receiving messages from the cycling community as well. So,
And the share the road signs are helpful.
I don't think to a dump truck's gonna.
Not to know, but I don't know. They catch my eye. I'm like, that's a good reminder.
Yeah. Some people, it makes them angry though.
Yeah, no, I
We
know.
look at targets and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, there are things that this group can do to support this plan, or anything as it comes to safety, in particular on Riverside. Please let us know.
I appreciate your feedback on the plan. I'll pass that along to the consultants and let you know what happens at the council meeting next week.
Thank you.
Yes,
Great
thank you.
job.
Yeah, excellent job. Staff reports.
Staff reports.
There was a WLOS piece this morning on Taylor's Wave.
I haven't seen it yet, but I heard.
It's
about it.
really quick. And the hot thing is they ran it right after they did a piece I think Riverlink's involved with on the E. coli levels. I'm like, that was really weird timing. It's really weird timing.
Oh my gosh.
It's horrible. I'm like,
Make it easy.
yeah, break it up. You don't have to run those two segments together.
So real quick, I think we gave you a brief update on the Helene recovery activity, but I'll just let you know, as we talked about, the debris removal is now going to be handled through the SMART program. The soccer fields have been cleared and reseeded, so we're just waiting on.
They're not receiving yet.
They're going to be reseeded soon. We met out there a couple weeks ago, and they were going to reseed them then, so that's the last thing I heard. So
I just checked.
Okay.
Yesterday.
It's great.
anyway, it's in progress to become soccer fields again. For the roads and culverts, the engineer completed their site visits this week, so they're going back to work on construction documents for those repairs. And for the parks, we're still working on the design and bid documents for Silverline Park. And I'll go into that a little bit more here in a minute. And then we're reviewing some options for Riverside Park for repair of the damages based on FEMA requirements versus our contract. It's a little complicated, but we're working on it. We're getting close to figuring something out. Taylor's Wave, you may have noticed the drilling happening over the last couple of weeks. The majority of the drilling is complete for the first section. Engineers are on site this week to assess that. They've started placing boulders today. They started placing boulders yesterday, but then they had to remove the boulders, but now they're back in. So there's boulders in that area now. Staff held it. We went and met with the Buncombe County Emergency Services, several different agencies across the county to talk about the wave and emergency response to the wave during construction and after construction. They wanted to learn more about what the wave was going to be, what the structure itself was going to be, what our plans were for safety. And we're planning to meet on site with them and the contractor closer to the first section being complete so they can see it before the water's running over it, so they can kind of know where it is and how to get there and access points and that kind of thing. So I thought that was a pretty productive meeting. We're still on pace to complete the project by the end of the calendar year. That's tentative, depending on weather. We'll have a better idea of that time frame once the boulders are set for the first half. So Silverlawn Park, one of the projects in that park is repair of the riverbank, and those design plans are complete. They're working on, and that's not a boulder toe wall like Riverside Park was. This is just matting and reseeding and removing woody debris from the area. They thought that was the best for where it's located and how the ecology of it all. We've already received our erosion control permit, and we're working on a no-rise certification for that. So that's in the works. For the other repairs in the park, they're working on the bid documents for that, and they're supposed to be completed with that by the end of July. So we'll be issuing that bid for solicitation, hopefully sometime in August. We do have a plan to temporarily open the park between now and construction beginning on the repairs, but as Shannon was talking about earlier, the debris pickup was put on hold for several weeks, so they're going to be getting started again, removing debris from the waterways, and they're going to be using Silverline Park as a collection site for a couple weeks. But once they move out, we'll open it up to the public until we start construction again.
Sorry, Adrian, when did you say that was the plan to reopen Silverline?
Well, I don't know exactly. The debris contractors have to use it for a collection site, so they just got their notice to proceed today. And so it's going to take them a minute to get started again because a lot of them left because they didn't have any work here. So I have to get them all back and get started again. But maybe a month or so, and then we'll talk about. I don't know. I don't want to overpromise, but
Yeah, if we have an opportunity, once that debris work is done, if we have an opportunity to reopen the park before construction begins for park renovation, then we probably will. But if construction is going to happen on the heels of, we might as well just keep it closed, because we don't want to frustrate
Yeah.
people by
Right.
opening it for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Ideally, the debris collection would go rather quickly and then we'd have a small time frame to open it, but that's our plan. But I don't know. We're not sure.
Are we ballparking like the end of the year, Silverline, or next year sometime,
Construction,
or yeah, for when?
like for the complete thing being
Yeah.
done.
When is it?
End of
Hopefully.
mid next year.
I think it'll be done. I think.
So
I think we
Spring?
want to try to have
maybe
bids-
spring next year.
Bids by the end of the
Yeah.
year, construction in the spring. I
Okay.
guess.
Bathrooms will come back into that conversation.
Pickleball
Yes,
courts.
they're in that conversation.
Pickleball courts,
We
right?
want to, we want the construction team, whoever we contract with, we want to do the bathrooms and the renovation.
Great.
But the bathrooms will be a separate, not a separate contract, but it'll be a separate.
Bid.
itemized
yeah.
for-
But all of that's included in what they're working on now. That'll be completed by the end of July that we can then issue for bids. And then community gardens coming along great. I don't know if these numbers are right, Katie, but I took the report I got from the grant. So did the best I could. But it looks like they have 12 raised beds installed. They've done that through Katie and her team plus volunteers. They've hosted 15 volunteers and completed 100 hours of work through volunteer workdays over the month of June. They have some more work days scheduled for July. So every Saturday from 9:30 to 11:30, and every Wednesday from 5 to 6:30. If you are interested in volunteering, they do plan to designate 6 of the beds to Wolfen residents next year, but they're just working on getting set up this year because they got pushed back from the hurricane. And then I thought it was neat that they're now starting to work on a pollinator garden, and they have donated plants for that project. So they're working on that now. So that'll be in place soon. Anything I missed or you want to add?
Where are you putting the pollinator?
So along Lookout Road,
Mhm.
you can kind of see we started to sheet mulch along there because it's all grass. So in the fall is when we'll actually be able to
Okay.
plant pollinator plants.
Okay.
But we're at least prepping the site now.
Nice.
And maybe also along Midwood is the other road that goes along the other side.
Mhm.
It's also a slope, so probably over there as well.
It's looking really nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, we're very excited. We have a tool shed now, so we don't have to keep like schlepping things back and forth.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And that's all the updates I have.
Anything else to add? Okay, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for stepping up.
Ah,
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for the job.